Hello, everybody. It's David here with an orientation to the work that we're going to be doing to help plan for the reopening of school in 2021, helping to design the academic and co-curricular programs. To begin with, you're going to watch this orientation video. I'm going to make it as succinct and helpful, I think, as possible, and then I'll have a little assignment for you, which I'll follow up with so you to get ready for our first meeting. So our purpose is to prepare a plan for delivering an academic and co-curricular program for the school year in 2021 that is flexible and responsive to the unpredictable circumstances that we will face. This is the team, and I'll share this slideshow with you as well, so you can refer to it later, but you've met everybody, but you'll get to meet them a little more when we get together. Just so you know, this team has department chairs, it has academic technology people, it has scheduling people, it has learning support services, it has a parent and board member, and other academic administrators, so it's a good mix. Our process, in terms of the phases that we'll go through, we will start off as designers, as architects, thinking bigger picture about the design principles that we want to guide us, and then we'll look at the needs and answering essential questions before we start our planning. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Once we've come up with all of our plans, we'll go move into a preparation phase. How do we communicate? How we design professional development, how we orient teachers, students, and families, and then we'll launch, ongoing throughout the year, communicating, evaluating, modifying. In terms of how we'll do our work, in our group meetings, which I do hope to keep to a minimum because I know that we're all busy, I want to use them as a place where we're really either sharing things that we've come up with and getting feedback on them and developing ideas and proposals. And in between the meetings, I will do a lot of work to sort of take what people have said and move it along and move it forward. And I imagine there will be other members of the group as called upon and as volunteering to help with that work in between. So there'll be a lot of in-between work to move us along, and then there will also be those. I'll take our work to the steering committee to report on what we've come up with and get feedback from them, and also to collaborate and get questions answered. And then, of course, they sort of have that final approval, and then we'll come back and work in our group. In terms of the context and background, I've been doing research on this for a few weeks, and I'll share all my resources with you, but I wanted you to have some of the same context and background, kind of a quick catch-up. So I'm going to start off right with an old Yiddish saying, humans plan and God laughs. It's modified, for today's times, and also the original German Yiddish is debatable, but that's the idea, right? So here we are in this situation where we've got to make plans, even though we know that we're basically planning for the unplannable in many ways. So we have to think really flexibly and nimbly and think about things that can survive all that uncertainty and still have a core to them that we all feel good about. So I'll say more about that. I'm going to start with the NAIS Guide to Scenario Planning, some excerpts and highlights from that, because I think it gives a good background. To begin with, NIS kind of presents a bunch of pages about the trends that were affecting independent schools before the pandemic, right? So I think the one that, there are fewer babies and fewer kids in school age around, right? And again, you can look at this all in more detail later, giving you the overview. In terms of the economic trends, right? So if boomers and Gen Xers have much of the wealth, 3% is held by millennials. Those are going to be our parents, are already our parents. So they're going to have more trouble sending their kids to private school. Obviously, these economic trends are even worse in the current situation. Increasing competition from charter schools, from home schools, virtual schools, which I think, right? So they're going to be independent schools that have already said, we're going to run an online program, and you know what? We're going to offer it to everyone, everywhere. So I know, I think there's a school in Charlotte, right, that's already done it, and if one of our kids wanted to drop out of Burke and just go to the Charlotte independent school, they could. I don't, international schools, maybe we don't have to worry about quite as much. In terms of, how technology is affecting learning and what we think of about learning, obviously that's just been accelerated through the roof right now, right? So, this idea that of a T shape, like we need a lot of skills and attitudes, the depth is where we go, and also that if I think that remote learning this spring or distance learning this spring has taught us coverage cannot be the same as it was, and so that may have to take a little bit of a downshift in the way that we think of its centrality and where we plan. And student agency took a huge upshift, right? And that requires a lot of social emotional learning, a lot of 21st century skills. So I think all of this has been hugely accelerated. These tuition trends, again, probably accelerated seeing what we're doing right now, right? So the little pink line at the bottom is enrollment, hasn't changed, whereas the other lines are, tuition and financial aid packages, outpacing, and wage growth, which hasn't gone up even in the top 5% as much as some of our stuff has. If you look at the bottom one, it's about more and more families sort of choosing to save their money for schooling later, which I think, right, if the trend continues, you're talking about I'm saving for higher ed, I'm less likely to pay for high school. I'm saving for high school, I'm less likely to pay for middle school. So those are all trends. NAIS has this model about why parents decide to send their kids to independent schools. Why do they hire you? And again, it's a little hard for you to read. Don't worry too much about it. But job one is essentially, my child needs something that is different enough that they're not getting what they need in a public school. I need them in a safer environment, a more nurturing environment that can meet their needs. Number two is my child is basically okay. I want them to go to a really good college. I think private school is like my high school, but better. So I'm going to send them there. Number three is I don't buy in as much to the rat race. So I want social justice, or I want progressive values, or I want religious values, whatever it is that the independent school can provide. Number four is I want my kid is a superstar, and you're going to develop them to be super. Now, we did a little analysis with NAIS a little while back, and as you could no doubt guess, most of our families fall into job one and job three, at least when they send their kids to Burke. By senior year or junior year, sometimes they move into job two or job four. I think the real question right now is all these jobs might be up in the air. So we just need to think a little bit like what's the job that parents are hiring for us for next year? And I'll say a little more about that later. The last thing NAIS says is, there's three kind of approaches to this scenario, to this planning for next year, right? One is we're going to take what we were doing and just continue doing it the exact same way, and that's continuity, and that's pretty much what we did this spring. Evolution is saying, well, let's take this is a new world, let's evolve, let's adapt. We are who we were, but let's make some improvements and changes. And of course, transformation is saying maybe this is an opportunity to really rethink things and to look ahead further than just 2021, but beyond, and how we are positioned. So I'm about to share with you sort of a model to the approach that I want to use. And of course, right, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And so I think that's important to keep in mind whenever we talk about models. So this model, comes mostly from an organization called Leadership and Design, and it's called Designing for Resilience. And the first thing, this isn't the order they gave it in, but I think it's important that I start with this because I think this is the hardest thing to do, which is you don't just jump into solving problems. And I'll say a little bit more about that as we go, but generally speaking, if you jump into solving problems, you may actually not be solving the right problem, and you don't really understand what people need, and you don't really understand the big picture, and you might end up having to just go back and do it all again. So next, think about your parameters, and Damien has already helped us think about some of this, and NAIS has as well. So what are some of the likely scenarios, and what are the real limitations, right? So we might think that the school day is a limitation, but maybe it's not. Maybe the number of people that we've hired and the number of students we have, those maybe are limitations, or the size of our rooms, right? But even then, let's think about how limiting they really are. But whatever those parameters are, some of them you can't really change, and you need to keep them in mind. NAIS in their report has these 4 scenarios, and this is just an example. These aren't exactly right. These are vague and broad, but it's just to give you an idea. Other scenarios that I've seen are like all on campus, all remote, mix of remote and, but asynchronous, mix of remote, right? But the question isn't which one of these scenarios, right, are we going to do, are we going to see? The question is, we kind of have to plan for all of them, and to some degree at the same time, right? So the next thing we really, I think, need to keep in mind when we get started is, what do we value? What are we good at? What do we think is the important thing that we are bringing that can't be replicated anywhere else? So our mission statement, our portrait of a graduate, our vision statement, our educational philosophy, etc. That has to inform the bigger ideas for our design principles, because those things should be totally obvious in any solution that we come up with, right? So the next thing is to think about, what are the actual human needs? And this goes into the survey that we're going to run, and any anecdotal stories that we all bring about how we experience things, like fatigue in front of a screen, like, needing childcare, right? Like, needing a break or needing to move around. Like, these are human needs that we need to be aware of when we're coming up with our design principles and our solutions. And the other piece, I think, is like, this goes back to that jobs to be done idea, which is, the job may not be what we thought it was, at least for a year. Some people, and I don't know how many people this applies to, just need somebody to take their kid out of their house, right? I mean, that may not be Burke's main thing, but certainly schools right now need to be open so that adults can work. And it's not about anything else other than that, right? That's primary human need. So what is that need? What is the value proposition? What are parents going to be hiring us for next year? And I think this sort of gives a little example. So what we don't want to do is just take what we were doing and just translate it over to a remote learning scenario. That's that substitution that we talk about in the technology models that some of you have been trained on for iPad training, right? So it's a good starting point, but it may not be as thoughtful as you need to be or want to be. So in between translating the on-campus practice to remote learning, ask like, what human need was that on-campus practice actually meeting? So just in this little example, right, it's about like, we were having assemblies for a sense of connection to a larger community. Do we just have a huge 300-person Zoom? And I know we're going to do that next week. Or maybe that's actually not a great way to build a sense of community, virtually. So it's just worth thinking about that human need before you go to solutions. All of this is anxiety producing. All of this is emotional. How are we as a group going to like build norms and get to know each other and collaborate productively remotely when some of us don't even know each other that well? So it's something that I'm going to be trying to think about, and I'll invite your help in doing it. But it's also, right, the community and the emotions that we're designing for as well. And then there's this slide, just kind of, right, any group has work they're doing, but then they also have like their group dynamics and the way they get along. And so it's just, I'm going to try and always be thinking about both of those things. I'm maybe much better at task, most of us are, but it's worth it to think about the maintenance of our group as well. And there's again a sort of breakdown of the kinds of things that are maintenance are like having norms and appreciating each other and acknowledging conflict and acknowledging mistakes and so on. Last couple ones, designing for ongoing professional learning. Anything we come up with is not going to end in the fall. We're going to have to keep thinking about how we grow over the time. And that looking ahead idea, right? Are we just doing for continuity? Are we designing for evolution? Or are we designing for transformation? Can we lay the groundwork for something that goes beyond 2021 and helps us move to be a different kind of school, a better kind of school? So for us, in terms of just getting started, we will start with design principles derived from our mission and values, keeping in mind the human needs, even though we'll learn more about those from the survey in the coming weeks, and our value proposition. Then we'll use the design principles to begin that transition to generating plans and solutions, keeping in mind the parameters and the needs. In design principles, I'll say a little more in the homework I assign you, but it's not just like, it's bigger, right? So organizations endure because they don't react, they create. They don't survive, they prevail. They don't succeed, they thrive. Here's my resources. I'm running out of time. I'll send you the homework.